Slave begins by demanding justice, but ends by wanting to wear the crown. Now, this is a quote from The Rebel by Albert Camus, the French philosopher. And he is talking in the context of post-French Revolution, basically the terrors that occurred in that time. And what he's saying is that you can overthrow a tyrant. You know, throughout history, there's been tyrannical regimes, there's been evil regimes, and then eventually they get toppled. But if they get toppled and the people doing the toppling, the people who then come into power afterwards, have the same kind of mindset, the same ideology as the people who were the previous oppressors, all that happens is a switch. All that happens is the oppressed become the oppressors. Now, at the time of recording, it's a pretty interesting time in history. It's a time in history that will probably be remembered for decades, even centuries to come, where we seem to be at the end, well, at some kind of end of the aftermath of October the 7th, which of course was not the beginning of the story of Israel and Palestine. Albert Camus' quote could be, it seems quite apt in many ways to looking at the history of that region, where we look at how the oppressed, in terms of the victims of the horrors of the 1940s and what the Nazis inflicted upon, amongst other people, the Jews, and the way in which the State of Israel was formed, the Nakba, and the way in which, in actual fact, the oppressed became the oppressors in many ways, not the actual exact people, but in many ways the attitude that, you know, they had been oppressed in this way. Now, I'm obviously putting this very crudely and very simply. It's a lot more complicated than this. But I do believe psychologically there's a thing of, you know, we've been through this, we've been through these horrors, you know, and that gives us the right to then inflict that on others. And really that's what we've seen with the history of Israel and Palestine. And now, even more so, since we've probably seen the most horrific example of this since October the 7th. We see it in a kind of microcosm, because for many people the story starts on October the 7th. We see these horrific attacks, which of course, yeah, like no one would condone. Well, I certainly would not condone what Hamas did on October the 7th. It was absolutely horrific. But then we see this response of the IDF in Israel, which is, you know, off the scale, kind of disproportionate, complete wholesale destruction of Gaza. And that has angered a lot of people around the world. So, of course, the people of Gaza are going to be absolutely furious. But I've noticed something quite worrying, which is a rise of a type of anti-Semitism that I have never seen in my lifetime. Now, to give you some context, I grew up in Mill Hill, which is one of the most Jewish areas in the world. Really, in terms of Jewish areas, you've got, obviously, Israel. You've got a very Jewish area in New York, and you've got North London. Those are the most Jewish centres in the world. So, you know, many people I meet who didn't grow up in North London have barely even met a Jew before. I went to a primary school where there were more Jews than non-Jews, so I've grown up around Jews. Judaism is very, very normal to me. We used to have assemblies at primary school about Jewish holidays and stuff. So the idea of anti-Semitism has always been quite an alien thing to me. Like, it's, you know, or the idea of that you would actually not like Jewish people or anything like that. You know, like a lot of my friends are Jewish, and certainly a lot of my friends were Jewish growing up. Since October the 7th, and it's ironic because the IDF, Benjamin Netanyahu and the like, have said, well, you know, Hamas have increased anti-Semitism. Well, actually, no, the policy of Israel has increased anti-Semitism, because I now see so much more hatred towards Jewish people, so much more real anti-Semitism. And I wonder what's going to happen now, because I don't believe for a second that Netanyahu and the IDF believe that they can actually eradicate Hamas. How can you kill an idea? You can't. So whatever happens now, whatever this Trump bullshit kind of peace deal is, which, is a load of nonsense. Having Tony Blair being the head of a peace commission, is like having Ted Bundy that being the head of the women's rights organization. It's just absolute fucking nonsense. So, whatever happens now is going to be hit by a massive backlash. There was an attack on a synagogue the other week, which is terrible, and I absolutely condemn it. And I actually fear for some of my Jewish friends. I really do. Some of my Jewish friends are not really that political. They don't really get involved in that kind of thing. They don't want to be caught up in this, but it's likely they will be because, I feel real anger at Israel, and I'm someone who grew up around Jews. I'm someone who will never be anti-Semitic because I'm educated, because I understand that the actions of a government do not dictate the way that normal people feel. I grew up in London. That doesn't mean I supported the Iraq War. In fact, I marched against it, just like many Israelis marched against the genocide of the Palestinians. But that's the reality. That's the reality. So I really, really implore people to think about that quote by Albert Camus. And think about, read that book actually, The Rebel. Because what he's saying in that book is really, unless, it's the thinking that has to change, it's the type of thinking that has to change. We can't just now go, let's just say that, I don't know, some sort of bullshit peace agreement is reached and some sort of nonsense government goes in Gaza. We can't now just all think, right, let's really get at the Jews, let's really get at the Israelis, and go the way that I see large swathes of the internet going, and just attack synagogues and stuff like that. That is not the answer. And ultimately, look, we could end up in a full reversal where you end up with Jews under attack and people blaming the Jews and getting another Holocaust. And then what would you get? Like another state of Israel. It could go on forever. It's going on forever because it's the same ideology. It's the same type of thinking driving policy. It's just the characters change. This type of thinking will never achieve anything because the truth is, it's not one group of people that's the problem. It's the way of thinking that's the problem. It's blaming one set of people for everything that's the problem. The problems are far deeper. The problems are largely economic. Normally in times of economic crisis, that's where we want to blame a certain set of people. If you really want to blame someone, look at the people who are making billions off divide and rule. Divide and rule is always the strategy of the extremely wealthy, the extremely powerful. Why do you think Elon Musk was talking at the Unite the Kingdom rally? Do not be a fool of divide and rule, and do not get into thinking that, let's hate the Jews now because of what they've done in Gaza. I, more than anyone, condemn the genocide, but that doesn't mean we should start hating Jews, because otherwise we're going to end up going full circle. So that's my message today. The slave begins by demanding justice, ends by wanting to wear the crown. Demand justice. Don't end by wanting to wear the crown and crushing the people who were once the oppressors.